Good morning and welcome to the new episode of New Horizons of Knowledge and Information, our Thursday program. You see, when we think of poles, ordinarily two poles come to our mind. North Pole and South Pole, and we living in Canada. Near the Arctic are more concerned with the North Pole. But the South Pole, the Antarctica, has been in news for a long time. Unfortunately, and I call it advisedly unfortunately, because of the lack of knowledge, most of our geologists have missed the third pole. Yes, they have, but not the environmentalists. And third pole is much more important because it directly affects the life of 1.3 billion people. Imagine it. It's a 1/6 of the world population that is affected by the third pole. While if you look at the North Pole, the population would be of Canada, the Scandinavian countries and Russia. That's it. South Pole would not affect immediately. I mean, normally whatever happens at one place would affect the world as a whole, but immediate effect. So the third pole affects immediately 1.3 billion people. And do you know how much area it is? Wow, it is smaller than the North Pole, it is smaller than the South Pole, but it has 100,000 square kilometers area. And it has 46,000 glaciers. Now imagine that much of the geographical third pole which we are not aware or which we ignore if we are aware. Where is it? It is in the south of China and north of India. Somewhere between the border, you can call it, between India and China. And the third is the third largest area of frozen water on this earth. Third largest frozen water. And as I said, this affects 1.3 billion people directly. Now, why is this pole important? The pole is important because with the climate change, and I advisedly use the word climate change, not the global warming, there is melting of the glaciers. And I told you 46,000 glaciers are in this area. Now, the two extremities of the earth, North Pole and the South Pole, are very important for regulating the climate. But they are also sensitive to climate change. The third pole is not at the extremity, it is very high. It's high above the sea level. And it may not affect the change, but is affected by the change. Now, could you believe that if we look at the water which is coming from the third pole, supports 120 million people directly through the irrigation system. 123 million people and 1.3 billion people indirectly. Imagine the river basins in China, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan. That is 1/5 of the total world population. And that population is directly and indirectly affected by the water from the third pole. And the water from this third pole sustains irrigation, sustains life. You know, this pole is very remote. It's not easily accessible. It includes Hindu Kush mountains in the Afghanistan region. It includes Tibet Plateau. And 10 of the largest Asian rivers begin in this pole. Yellow River, Yangtze River in China. They come here, Irrawaddy, river in Myanmar, Ganga, and Mekong, which goes in Vietnam. So 10 major rivers are in this area, and they irrigate the life, the plains, and sustain life. Now, would you believe that this area, the climate change has been so much there that while the global average has been 0.7 degree, here the temperature has increased by 1.5 degree, double than the global average. Till now, 500 small glaciers have disappeared altogether, and the others are shrinking rapidly. Now, one thing great has been done in Ladakh, which is a part of this North Pole. I was doing research and I put on the Facebook day before yesterday that one scientist started making ice stupas. Stupas are the minarets, like high pyramids in the Buddhist religion. So these pyramids are made of ice by the local scientist Wangchuk in Ladakh, where the water is not there, so he has started collecting water and freezing it with the air which blows. When they place the water there, then the air comes, it automatically freezes, becomes ice. So then it will slowly and slowly melt and feed the irrigation system. So those mini man-made glaciers are becoming the hope of the world. So human ingenuity is putting a stop to the ravages of nature. Now here is what I have always been saying, that the climate change has to occur because change is a part of human life and natural system. But human beings are capable of facing that. We talked the other day how the pollution can be used as a resource and is being used as a resource to make diamonds and also to use as a fuel, alternate fuel. Here it is that the same source which was going waste, you see, you don't use water continuously. If runoff is there, then goes waste. So runoff they have stopped and they have started making ice stupas. It's a local engineer who has done it. And when the things came up, we recommended Rolex award for him. Now, but is the third pole only suffering from what we call the climate change? No. The bigger problem is the dust and the pollution which is coming from China and India. As the air blows from India and China, full of dust, full of car exhaust and the coal burners, that settles on the ice. And when that dust and carbon settles on the ice, it absorbs the rays of the sun rather than reflect them away. So the reflection is not there, absorption is there, and then, that causes the melting of the ice. Now, it's not a climate change, it's a man-made pollution. So here it is, where we should have been careful. And, luckily now the third pole environment has started work, people are working. But let's not forget that initially more water is expected to come in the river waters if it continues the way it is. And this will call up flooding. And ultimately desertification. The desert will be formed where the fertile lands are there, like the lands of Indo-Gangetic plain. That plain, Indo-Gangetic plain, is one of the most fertile areas. But if the floods are there, and then the water comes down level, the result will be desertification. And that has to be avoided. Now coming back to the original thing, as we talked of knowledge, the frontier of knowledge, we are not aware, till recently we were not aware, most of the people at least, I'm talking of the people. The experts working over there were. But the North Pole and the South Pole have been the base of all the studies till now. whether it's a Montreal Agreement or whether it's a Paris Agreement of the last year, a year before last, like 2015. They are all based on what the ecological changes are happening, either in Antarctica or in Arctic. But what is happening in the middle of the world and 5 miles above the sea level, downwards, from 5 miles downwards, nobody has been talking about that. And that affects the 1/5 of the human population and most densely populated areas. Why is it? Has somebody thought of it? Is it because of the political reasons? Or is it because of the sheer disregard to the situation over there, because what happens there does not affect directly Europe or North America. Indirectly it would affect them, but directly it does not affect them. But what happens in Arctic affects Europe and North America right away. Now my point is that the human condition being what it is, whether it affects one geographical part or not, if it affects a section of humanity, it should be taken up with the same concern. Are we doing it? I would say we are not, because there's a lack of awareness. How many of you knew that there's a third pole? How many of you knew that 1.3 billion people are affected by it? People have not talked about it. At the most, for the last 4 years, they have been talking about the melting of the glaciers. That's it. But the total impact, the totality has been ignored, put into the cold storage, not discussed. And that is because the priorities are not there. What happens in a small desolate village in Ladakh? Or what happens in desolate areas of Gilgit, Baltistan in Pakistan? What happens in Panjshir Valley in Afghanistan? We don't care. What happens in Mekong Delta? We don't care. When I say we, I mean the so-called opinion makers in the West. They would not bother until and unless they are directly affected or their interests are ignored. This geopolitical and economic relationship is creating a strange sort of atmosphere and milieu. The decision makers are all in the West, North America and Europe. And unfortunately, what they think is aped, copied by the people in other parts of the world, whether it is China or India. Then the modification starts setting in. But the originality of concern is lacking. And if we are not concerned with the human condition, then there is a definite disconnect. And that disconnect is responsible for this situation. And this third pole, the credit for this goes to the Chinese President Xi. He has been remotely working there. And Wenchuk, about whom I talked earlier, making artificial man-made glaciers. What happens is that we have got to realize that it is not where the people are affected, but how many people are affected and where they are affected. We have got to assume and accept that human life, whether in Europe, whether in Canada, whether in New York States, United States, is as important as the life in Afghanistan, in Tibet, in GB, in Mekong, in Myanmar, in Nepal, anywhere. And if we can have that empathetic feeling, that can save humanity. Think about it and let awareness grow. That would be our call today. Thank you.